without a trace. Malaysian Airlines Flight 370 and the 239 people aboard the Boeing 777 has, as of this taping, simply vanished without a trace. It's not only one of the greatest aviation mysteries of all time, it's one of the greatest mysteries of all time, period. Now, no doubt, the true story will be known, and sooner rather than later, I suspect, but listening to the speculation and the theories being put forward provide us with some interesting fodder for how to think about unexplained events and reduce the unknown into at least the most likely and least likely explanations. Now, I'm a pilot, just a private pilot, but somebody who knows who loves aviation pretty well, so I thought we might take a look at how to eliminate the unlikely and come up with the plausible. So let's bring in Steve Green and Scott Ott to walk through this riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma. Gentlemen, I'll just say this one more time. I'm not an ATP-rated commercial airlines pilot, and I'm certainly not an aerospace engineer. I'm just a guy who likes and knows airplanes, so this is just rank speculation on my part and ours. But I think Occam's razor can help us here, so let's get the basics of what we know out of the way. After a routine takeoff and radio handoff, the transponder on Flight 370 was switched off. Now, the transponder is an electronic device. It's a small radio transmitter, really, that sends out coded information about the aircraft's altitude, and through the assigned transponder code given by air traffic control, it allows air traffic controllers to see the aircraft code, the airline, and altitude and some other information. Now, every time a ground-based radar beam sweeps the aircraft, the transponder sends this signal out, which is a good, strong signal, and it's read on the ground. Turning the transponder off, however, doesn't make the airplane disappear from radar, since the actual primary return from the ground-based radar, radar is an acronym for radio detection and ranging, still gives you the bearing and the distance, if not the altitude. Now, I predicted a few days before it was announced that if the transponder was turned off, then the plane would have to dive rapidly to get below the primary radar return to truly disappear from radar, and it looks like that's exactly what happened. So, Steve, coupled with a radical course change, does that sound like pilot suicide to you, as seems likely as what happened on Egyptian Air Flight 990, that's Egypt Air Flight 990, back in 1999, where the pilot just said Allahu Akbar and put the plane into the ground? Does that sound like pilot suicide to you? And if not, do you have a favorite theory?
I don't. You know what? This thing has been driving me nuts. I can't remember an issue this big that's gone on this long without me writing one word about it, either for vodkapundit.com or PJ Media or even for Trifecta, because you know I usually do the headline stories, and I've got absolutely nothing on this because it is such a deep and seemingly impenetrable mystery. But you know what? When you take a jumbo jet like that down to 5,000 feet, you lose a lot of range. What do you lose? Half your range, 2/3, something like that?
Yep.
Is that about right? Which really reduces the number of places where you can land this thing. Could they still have gotten it to Tehran? I don't know. You know, I saw Tammy Bruce, our friend and sometimes colleague on Twitter just yesterday, saying, you know, maybe Tehran now has 239 human shields in an airliner that they are busy repainting and reprogramming the transponder. We just don't know. What I do know is that some of the possibilities are frightening, and those are the ones that aren't mysterious and frightening. So I'm going to turn this one back over to you, Bill, and go back to scratching my skull.
Okay, so I'm going to rule out pilot suicide in a case like this, because if it is a pilot suicide, there'd be no reason to turn off the transponder. You'd make a final broadcast or not. You would simply push the plane into the ground. That's happened before, as I said, on an Egypt Air flight. He just simply decided to kill everybody aboard, push the plane into the ground. That's not what happened here. They dove, but they dove to below radar altitude. We know that, and there was a big course correction. So, Scott, there have been some speculations about an in-flight fire that forced an attempt to return back to make an emergency landing. There's even a theory now that says that the hijackers flew the aircraft so close in trail to another commercial airliner that they appeared to be the same blip on radar screens. And anybody who's done formation flying in two little airplanes knows that doesn't seem very likely. And there's a lot of ocean out there. So do you have a pet theory before I do a little more shaving with Occam's razor here?
No, I don't. I mean, in many ways, I'm like Steve. As I've mentioned before, my little brother is one of my little brothers is a 777 pilot, and he flies international flights. And he doesn't know any more than any of us know what might have happened here. I'll tell you, the appeal of the theory that there was something wrong on the plane, smoke filling the flight deck or something like that, that would have caused the pilots to take action. You know, you're supposed to, you know, what's the phrase? Aviate, navigate, then communicate. So they may have been caught up and tried to take action there, shut down the transponder or some of the electrical systems in order to try to get to whatever was causing the smoke. The appeal of that theory is that you have two pilots who were doing the right thing, who were trying to save the plane. And I think all of us would like to believe that we don't have to worry about the reliability of the people who are flying our planes. And certainly as the brother of a beloved 777 pilot, that doesn't enter my mind. I think of pilots with a very high sense of regard. That said, there is a tendency that we have to constantly try to bring the history as a point of reference into what could have happened. And so even when we set up our safety protocols after 9/11, for example, everything was done with the mind toward preventing another 9/11. And when terrorists do things, they're constantly looking for the opening. They're looking for the crease, the crack, the place where they can get through because your security system is built around, sort of fighting the last war, as they say at the Pentagon. So I really think when we finally find out what happened here, we're all going to be shocked, and there'll immediately be cries to, of course, fix the problem that caused the last issue.
Well, just parenthetic before I go on, fixing the problem that caused the last issue. The 9/11 attacks were caused by the cabin doors being unlocked and allowing the hijackers into the flight deck. And we know from this flight that one of the co-pilots had already let a couple of good-looking women onto the flight deck. So we have some indication of how seriously they take that particular security measure. But if I had to break this down based on what I know as a pilot and what I know about commercial aviation, here's how I would do it. First of all, turning off the transponder, in my opinion, automatically means that's a hijacking, and likely by either the pilots or by somebody with a gun or knife at the pilot's throat. By turning their transponder from their unique four-digit squawk code, to a setting of 7500 on the transponder, takes about 2 or 3 seconds. An automatic hijacking alert is sent out through the transponder, and every single radar screen in the country within range gets that alert that that plane is hijacked. As far as an in-flight fire is concerned, it is true that student pilots and private pilots are taught in an emergency to aviate, navigate, and communicate in that order, best summed up by the flight instructor's memorable line, "Don't drop the airplane to fly the microphone." But with 2 pilots with emergency oxygen masks, with 239 passengers on board an aircraft that size trying to return with air traffic to a large airport, it is just inconceivable to me that a simple "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday, we have a fire, we are returning to the airport" wasn't issued, and that the 7700 emergency code wasn't entered into the transponder. If there was a radio failure, 7600 on the transponder indicates radio failure. That's independent of the aircraft's radio systems. So when the transponder is switched off, I would just have to say the hijackers are involved. And getting it down below the ground return radar and then changing course is to me, essentially proof that this aircraft was hijacked. So what happened? I think, as Steve suggested, they miscalculated the range of the 777-200 extended range aircraft when flying at low altitude. The range for that aircraft is at 40,000 feet. No one appreciates how much easier it is for an aircraft like a 777 to fly at 40,000 feet than it is for it to fly at or near sea level. It's perfectly safe down low, but it's much, much slower and much, much more fuel hungry because the air is so much denser. I think the plane was hijacked, and I think they miscalculated on the range because they were flying much lower than they should have been, and I think they put it in the Indian Ocean. Now, it would be worse if it crashed into jungle terrain, because if you hit the water, that leaves a large and widening debris field. If you go into the jungle, that just leaves a hole the size of an airplane. However, there are apparently 634 runways within the theoretical range of Malaysian Flight 370, and it's possible it's at one of those locations as we speak. If that is the case, if that plane is landed on the ground in one piece, I assure you, we know where that airplane is. And we're not saying anything because we have some kind of a rescue operation in motion. But if I had to bet, I'd say it was a failed hijacking that went down due to fuel exhaustion. And at the very least, To lose an aircraft this big with all of our modern satellites, our communications and radar, this should finally put the nail into the UFO vortex explanations of the Bermuda Triangle, where little airplanes with propellers disappeared 50, 60, 70 years ago. There's a lot of air, and there's a lot of water, and there's a lot of land out there. And may we hope against all hope that those people on board Malaysian Flight 370 found a way to return from all of them.